Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. Robert Lyman wrote a new report. It's called He Shoots, Does He Score? And he's talking about the Canada-Alberta Memorandum of Understanding that's supposed to be bringing a pipeline to the west coast from Alberta. That's the gist of it, right? That's what people are focused on. So, many people are saying, oh, well, that was a clever negotiation because it kind of stopped the separatist movement in Alberta. But did it? And also, what's really in this deal? I mean, there are some good things, actually, for Alberta. For instance, the cap on oil and gas is off. So that's gone, and that's good. And the net zero clean electricity regulations, they've been withdrawn. So that's very important because now Alberta can build out some AI infrastructure here and continue to run our province mostly on natural gas. Without that drawback, we would have been in a situation where we could only have run natural gas plants 18 days a year, which is ludicrous because if you look at the Alberta Electric System Operator, you'll see that we're running natural gas 24/7 to keep the lights on here and people warm. So also promised in this MOU is a discussion about pipelines. So, okay, it's better than a no, but it's not a yes. And as Robert points out, even with the sort of Building Canada Act and all the speeded up regulations, the Major Projects Office, it still would take like 6 or 7 years before we'd be getting toward building a pipeline. That's, of course, if the province of British Columbia and the First Nations in BC and now in Alberta don't stomp their little feet and make a problem. Because right now everybody's stomping their feet. It's funny because Canada's economy relies on oil and gas for a big chunk of revenue. As I've said in other videos, what are we going to do? We need that revenue. But anyway, so there's some other sticky things in the MOU, like the commitment to net zero 2050. It's ironic, it was just the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and practically everyone in the world is running away from net zero because they understand that you need energy to be competitive. And if you're going to have an AI industry, then you need a lot of energy. But Canada seems dedicated to net zero 2050, even though it's destroying our economy. And another bad thing is that we committed to raising the industrial carbon tax in Alberta to $130 a ton. Now, it had been sitting at about $20 a ton in Alberta. And Alberta has a unique market. There are a number of ways that large emitters can participate in what they call the TIER program, TIER. So it's not simply the carbon price, but, $130 a ton. That's a lot of money. And, of course, also mandatory methane cuts. This is going to hurt the oil and gas industry and farmers. This is a big hit to farmers and totally unnecessary. If you watch our event with Dr. Joseph Fournier, he shows that a big chunk of Canada is peat land. And peat bogs give off a lot of methane, and it can't even properly be measured because it's so dependent on atmospheric conditions. So, we're making companies and farmers, count their methane emissions and reduce them and get rid of cows because they're burping, when that's not really the major source of methane. And even if it was, in Canada, Alberta only contributes, I think it's 0.006 of a degree Celsius in warming over the past century. So really, we're not China here. We're not putting out a lot of emissions. And the other problem that Robert brings up in his report is that of costly CCUS. You know, the Pathways Project is, I think it's 6 of the big oil sands companies. They're planning to put in a CO2 pipeline and pipe the CO2 from the oil sands production region to a secure facility under the Cold Lake region. But it costs a fortune to do that. A lot of money. And so they want the public to pay 75%. So far, the feds are putting in, I'm not sure what, 50 or so, and Alberta's putting in 12%, I think it is. But they want taxpayers to pick up more of the tab. That's a lot of money. Robert Lyman has written a couple of reports. One is called The Carbon Capture Trap for Taxpayers, and the other one's called Turning Taxpayers into Risk Takers, which talks about contracts for difference, where taxpayers make up whatever gap there may be in costs related to carbon pricing or energy markets. It's, you know, what are we getting ourselves in for here? And then he also mentions that there's no pipeline guarantee, actually. So you know what it is? It's one of these. It's the old carrot trick, right? And this carrot trick is so old that this carrot is actually growing whiskers. So it's that old carrot trick of, trying to keep Alberta in Confederation, try and keep Albertans happy. People always say, oh, we built you a pipeline, meaning Trans Mountain expansion. Well, actually, no, you didn't build Albertans a pipeline. The federal government had to take it over because the developer of that pipeline was just so exasperated because of all the lawfare. They were constantly being hit with lawsuits. Once they'd gotten approval, then they'd be hit by another lawsuit by an environmental group, and they'd finish that and they'd start building, then be hit by protests, and they just gave up. They said, here, you guys build it. So we did, and it cost about 3 or 4 times as much as it should have. So, that doesn't make the future look very rosy for any proponent who might want to build a pipeline here, especially when all the First Nations are now claiming that they have a veto. They actually don't. The federal government is in charge of coasts in Canada, and if this is considered a project in the national interest, the federal government should be able to just say, you know what, build that pipe. But they're not doing that. They're dancing with all kinds of people at the party, right? They're not committing to one partner. But we do have this MOU. So, I guess the upshot of Robert's report is that what happens with the MOU is it makes Prime Minister Carney look pretty good. Looks like he dealt with Alberta separation, that he committed to a pipeline. He also said that First Nations should be involved in and consulted, and that the province of BC should have a say. So, he looks great. So he took his best shot. But did he really score? I guess we'll find out. In the meantime, I'm pretty sure that a lot of Albertans are not interested in this hairy old carrot because they've seen it before many, many times. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling. Read Robert's report. It's on our blog. He shoots. Does he score?